reason it dropped from 8.2 to 8.1 was not because we created a lot of jobs. As a matter of fact, only 115,000 net new jobs were created. That was well beneath what it was expected to be. It should have been in the hundreds of thousands, but it wasn't. The reason the rate came down was because about 340,000 people dropped out of the workforce. So many became discouraged they stopped looking for work.
I'm back with Steve Moore in our Washington Bureau to talk about the jobs numbers. But as you just saw, Steve, Mitt Romney commenting on them, this isn't just a jobs report that comes out and people sort of talk about it up or down. We've now got a presidential candidate up and running to lean on it. And I got to tell you, Steve, I think the conversation about jobs is going to get a lot more interesting because the jobs picture and the unemployment picture is, in fact, a lot more interesting than I think the president has been trying to make it out. What do you think?
Well, you know, the president tried to put some lipstick on this pig today and talk about how wonderful this was that we had private sector job creation. But, Dan, I think the real story here, and we have a story about this in the paper tomorrow, the real story is disappearing American workers. That, as Mitt Romney just said in that clip that you just showed, more and more Americans are dropping out of the labor force. This is very unusual, Dan, because usually in an expansion, more Americans enter the labor force. We're getting exactly the opposite now.
Well, elaborate on that a little bit. I mean, what sorts of people? I guess people are dropping out. Let's put it this way: at both ends of the labor force. Young people graduating from college now, the sort of people that President Obama has been addressing on his college tours, are having a hard time getting into the labor force. And at the other end, older people who are retiring earlier and find themselves sort of stuck outside the labor force if they want to come back and make some money. So this is the sort of individuals who do, in fact, lose hope, lose heart, and give up looking for a job.
Well, that's right, Dan. We used to call those people discouraged workers. I think maybe we should call them now depressed workers, because you're right. People are just basically giving up. They're saying there are no good jobs out there to be had. One of the related statistics that came out today in the labor market report was that real wages are running behind the rate of inflation, Dan. So that means people's paychecks are not keeping pace with their ability to pay their bills. That's a problem too. But you know, I've just never seen this in 40 years, where usually in an expansion you have more and more people entering the workforce. Sometimes it takes a time to get the unemployment rate down because all these new people enter the workforce. But what you have right now is the opposite. People are not feeling confident about their ability to find a good job, and they become so demoralized, Dan, they just tell the pollsters who call them up, I'm not even looking for a job anymore because there are no good jobs to be had.
Well, I think the big figure in the room, Steve, as you well know, it isn't reported this morning, but it is the fact that in the first quarter we had growth at 2.2%.
Yep.
And we've had growth around 2% for the last 3 years. You are just not going to get job creation when the economy is growing at that rate.
Well, you're exactly right. And by the way, I think actually the causality may run the other way. If you're not getting 200, 250, 300,000 more people working, Dan, you're not going to see the output growth that we want to get out of this recession and to recover the ground that we lost. You know, we still haven't recovered all the lost GDP that we lost in 2008 and 2009. So this has been by far the most anemic recovery. It's very difficult for the president to tell the American people these are positive statistics. Nobody believes that.
Very quickly, Steve, you've been looking at an interesting aspect of this, which is the effect on welfare payments and unemployment payments on people's participation.
Yep.
Tell us quickly about that.
Well, one of the reasons I hypothesized, Dan, that people are dropping out of the workforce is because President Obama has made welfare benefits, food stamps, disability benefits, Medicaid, all of these are much more plentiful and generous, Dan. And by the way, don't forget about unemployment benefits. And I think that's kept people out of the workforce, and it's basically paying people not to work. And guess what, Dan, as you know, if you pay people not to do something, they won't do it.
Yeah, well, obviously the economy cannot persist indefinitely with people discouraged and depressed about rejoining the workforce.